I think we should start. We will start, guys. Hi, guys. Good evening. So, this is our, I think, ninth class of the medical affairs course. So today we have Dr. Vaishnavi Savsankar with us to take your class, guys, on the, regulatory, aspects and regulatory requirement in the medical affairs. Dr. Ronak will be, I think, joining very soon. Okay. So let me take this privilege to introduce Dr. Vaishnavi. So she is the Medical Governance and Excellence Manager for South Asia in Bayer with over 11 years of experience in pharmaceutical industry. And in her role, she ensures the compliance and excellence in the activities and processes with medical affairs and the wider pharmaceutical businesses. So Dr. Vaishnavi has held various positions within Bayer, including the medical scientific liaison, medical operation manager and medical information lead, and regional medical lead for established products in Asia Pacific region. She holds an MDS in oral pathology and has received numerous accolades for her leadership and contributions to global, regional, and local projects. Dr. Vaishnavi is also a certified professional coach and is the DSO coach for Bayer India, PH. She also supports oncology sustainability initiatives in India. She has contributed to various publications and position papers in the field of clinical research. Her dedication to continuous learning and self-improvement makes her a respected figure in the field. So, guys, with that, I would welcome Dr. Vaishnavi to take over for the class. And please, as I always tell my students in the starting of course as well, and today I got another chance to interact with you. Please ask as many as questions you can ask. Okay, and clarify all the questions, right? And our teammates will be there to handle the things. So over to you, Dr. Vaishnavi. Thank you very much for joining and thank you very much for accepting our request to take this session.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ajit, and thank you for that introduction. It's really nice to, interact with this class, and I'm very excited to really hear from all of you and answer any questions that you may have. I will try to make this as simple as possible. However, regulatory and compliance is a slightly complicated topic, but I have tried to sort of make it easy to understand. Yeah, but if there's any point in time where you do feel that you're not understanding something, please feel free to unmute yourselves and ask the question. Or you can always put in your questions in the chat or wait for the Q&A at the end of the session to ask your questions as well, right? Okay, so just a disclaimer, because I'm in compliance, so I have to do this. So any views and statements that I make in this presentation are my own and cannot be attributed to my company per se, the organization that I work with. And of course, this presentation is merely for educational purposes, and it's not intended as legal or regulatory advice, right? Okay, so let's start off with a brief overview of what is compliance, right? So what is basically regulatory and medical compliance mean? So it basically means the strict adherence to all laws, regulations, guidelines, and any standards that govern the entire pharmaceutical life cycle. So it is from drug development up till the end of the life cycle of the product, right? And why do we do this? It's basically to make sure that all drugs that are developed are used safely, are of high quality, and of course, at the end of the day, public health or health of our patients are protected, right? Now, in different countries, there are different bodies that oversee this. You must have heard of FDA, right? In the US, there's EMA in the European Union, and there's also MHRA. In India, this organization is called the CDSCO, right? So it's the Central Drug Standard Control Organization. And this is the body that oversees the quality and, the regulation of drugs and cosmetics in India. Now, the role of a medical governance or medical compliance officer in any pharmaceutical organization is basically to identify key risk areas that we have within the pharmaceutical organization, take steps to mitigate these risks, also put in place any corrective and preventive actions in case there is a violation of any particular regulation, and of course be audit and inspection ready. And we'll come a little to this as we go on to this, right? In some organizations, medical governance or medical compliance operates as a separate function within medical affairs. So a lot of multinational companies actually have a separate medical compliance or medical governance personnel within the medical affairs department. Initially, it used to always be covered by the country medical director, but more recently it has separated out as a separate function so that a country medical director can focus on things like strategy and excellence, and medical governance and compliance is separated out. While in some organizations, this could also come under the compliance and risk management team. So that was also your legal team who can take care of this as well, right? Okay, so just coming to what does compliance have to do in medical affairs, right? So the evolving role of medical affairs and where compliance fits in to the different activities. I'm sure during the course of the different things that you've read about or learned about medical affairs so far, you'd have learned that we wear different hats. So the main focus of a medical affairs function is really thought leadership, like managing relationship with your thought leaders. It could also be sharing medical expertise and scientific exchange with not only thought leaders, but it is also, to wider personnel such as your regulators, your policymakers, and even more recently, it can also be patients, right? We also play a pivotal role in research and development, analyzing, interpreting, and communicating data to different stakeholders. Also looking at patient-centric care. How do we help our doctors make the best treatment decision for their patients? And of course, more recently, there is also a lot that has come up with AI and digital innovation as well, right? So medical plays a role in all of this. Now, compliance, even though it's one of the hats, I would say that it comes and plays a part in each one of these activities that we do within medical affairs and also the wider business. So it's not only something that medical affairs does, but it's also something that overall as a pharmaceutical organization, compliance is something that everybody needs to keep in mind. And it's a hat that everybody needs to wear as well. Now, this becomes a little more important with the recent shifts that have happened in terms of, from how it was previously to what it is now. So if you look at the people, previously in a pharmaceutical organization, our key focus was always the doctor, the HCP, right? But over recent times, the stakeholders we're engaging has also differed, right? It's changed. So it's not only doctors, but we're also engaging with policymakers. We're also engaging with patients on a certain level, right? To really understand their perspective and get the patient's perspective and keep it at the center of everything that we do. Now, in terms of activities, of course, previously we used to do a lot of face-to-face activities. Now, if you see, a lot of digital activities are also being done. So in terms of this, the compliance and regulations change as per the activities that we're doing, not only the people, but also the activities. And then thirdly, compliance also changes as per the processes that we're following within an organization. So for example, previously we always used to work in siloed groups, which basically means you have a separate medical affairs function, you have marketing functions, you have sales, you have regulatory, and everybody's doing their own tasks and own activities, right? But more recently, especially in a lot of multinational companies, this has changed to for tasks and activities to be more squad based, which basically means that different functions from different squad work on a particular activity. So basically, lots of regulations apply to that particular project team, right? So the way we are structured or organized within the company also makes a difference to the regulations that are applicable to us. Yeah. So that's just a little about where compliance sits in medical affairs. Now, let's look at the key, sort of requirements or regulations that really impact medical affairs functions, right? The main thing is about promotion of drugs and medical devices. And in terms of promotion, it's really about external communication. So how are we communicating about our products and medicines in a non-promotional way, right? And it's a very fine line. So how do we stay non-promotional at the same time, provide doctors with the efficacy and safety data of our molecules. So it's really about being fair, balanced, accurate, those kind of things. The second one is about clinical trial regulations. So the research that is conducted by companies also are governed by certain laws and regulations. So if you look at promotion of drugs, it's usually coming under the UCPMP code, and that has become mandatory since last year. So it's even more important to follow it. In terms of clinical trial regulations, we have the new drugs and clinical trial rules and requirements. In terms of good clinical practice, this also comes under the Drugs and Cosmetics Acts and the new drugs and clinical trial rules. And good clinical practice is more about protecting patients who are involved in research, right? So any GCP, so why we do good clinical practice is to make sure that our patients are protected in any research activity that we do, right? The fourth one is about good publication practice. So as medical affairs, we're also involved a lot in publishing the research that we are involved in, right? And it is important to be fair and ethical in the publication as well. It's important not only to publish data that is positive, but publish everything that has been found in that research, right? And that's called transparency. It's about being fair and ethical and transparent in the research that we've done as an organization. The fifth one is anti-corruption and anti-bribery. Now, that's also a key regulation because we do a lot of scientific activities in medical affairs. You would conduct advisory boards, you would conduct CMEs, scientific meetings. So there really needs to be a balance between how you're choosing the doctors that you're engaging for these activities, making sure you're not choosing them based on their prescription and really choosing them for their value as a speaker or the value as an advisor, and also paying them appropriately as per the services. And this is called fair market value, right? So FMV plays a big role in making sure that we're paying the doctor appropriately and not over and above what is usually paid, say, in other countries or to other doctors. Another regulation is about conflict of interest. Now, conflict of interest is something where if you have an organization that you are engaging with, it is important that any conflict of interest, so for example, if you're paying them, it is disclosed appropriately, right? And we have a lot of, even now, the UCPMP requires us to disclose our activities and the amount of money we are paying or using in performing certain activities or engaging doctors in educational activities, right? So any scientific activities with HCPs, with organizations, even if you're doing, say, providing them educational grants, there has to be a conflict of, there shouldn't be a conflict of interest there. Then we come to data protection and data privacy. There has been a recent update in something called the DPDP rules, which is the data protection and data privacy requirements for India. And this really talks about the collection and processing of personal data, right? And this could be personal data of anybody who you collect information from. And most importantly, your doctors, because we do collect, their personal data. When we're paying doctors, we collect a lot of their financial records. We, collect Aadhaar, PANs. We also may collect, their email address, their phone numbers for sending frequent communications to them. And these are now being more regulated by the DPDP Act, right? Because we need to be careful about this, and they also need to be aware of how we're collecting it, how we're storing it, and making sure that it is not, it is stored in a safe way, and it cannot be breached in any way, right? So those are things that we have to take care of, whether it's doctors or it could also be patient information through a third party. So for example, if you're having a patient support program, it is also important for us to check the systems or how your third party is storing that data, because they are acting on your behalf. So it is important for us to also be careful about how your third party stores patient data, how whether the system that they're storing it cannot be breached in any way, and they have backups of data, those kind of things. Yeah. So, and the last one is, of course, and this is the most important, it's about pharmacovigilance and quality, right? So everything that we do is any pharmacovigilance activity, any safety and quality incidents is reportable to PVPI. So we, in every country, more or less, as a pharmaceutical organization, we are liable to report adverse events and quality complaints within a certain timeline or time frame, right? And this is something that the government takes very seriously. And as we go forward, we will see some examples of violations and what it has cost certain companies. Now, what are the key risks, right? So if you talk about compliance, you're also talking about risk areas, because you really need to look at, what are the risks versus benefit of doing a particular activity. I think Preetham has a question. You want to unmute yourself and ask, Preetham?
Hi, I'm Preetham.
Yeah.
So you have said about a lot of laws. Thank you for that. But DPDP law is only concentrated on the data which is done in. It is basically the digital data. DPDP
Yep.
Act is only focused on digital data. It's
Yep.
not on any data which is, say, for example, you're talking to a doctor or patient, you get some data verbally. So that will not come under DPDP because I
No,
know DPDP Act. So in
it does.
that scenario, how will you do you database the data, then you make it under privacy laws, or that data can be lost or somewhere. So how do you take care of that kind of data?
So at the end of the day, it's always about how you're storing that data, right? So if you're storing it in a digital format, the DPDP, like you said, is applicable. If you
Yeah,
are, or it's even for digital engagement, if you are collecting it for a singular purpose, the DPDP unfortunately doesn't cover that, right? So there is a
yeah.
gray area. And that's where companies have to come in and really, put in certain requirements and regulations as to how you are going to treat that data that you collect. So for example, in our company, whatever data you collect, whether it is digital or whether it is, even sort of you're collecting it, face to face, or however you are taking it and storing it. If you're taking any information from a third person or a party, you still having some sort of agreement or some sort of consent with that doctor, which talks about, how we are treating their data, who to approach in case you want to, sort of withdraw that data or you don't want to be communicated with in any way. So those things are important for a company to put down themselves if it is not covered in any law or requirement or regulation. Does that cover your question? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, so going into risks, right? And this is just a few, and there are a lot more risks that we're talking about when we're doing activities in medical affairs. But the most common, because our role is a lot customer facing, right? So it's really about inappropriate promotion or inappropriate communication with external healthcare providers. So it is important that all our communications and activities are fair, balanced, and are not based on commercial considerations, right? So we need to make sure that if you're talking about, say, efficacy of a particular molecule in medical, it is our role to also talk about the safety of that molecule, because our role in medical affairs is to really help the doctor make the right decision for their patients. It's not about promoting the drug. It's really about making them make informed treatment decisions, which are the best for their patients' well-being. Yeah. Another one is also about transparency of clinical trial findings. So we will see some examples where if you have certain negative data from your clinical trials, which do not benefit your molecule, it is still important to have it published and have it open so that everybody is aware of any potential risks that may be involved with the molecule that you have in the market, right? And that is really important. Now, we also talk about patient safety and privacy. Now, a lot of cases from health authorities where they've pulled pharmaceutical company ups is because of unreported adverse events, right? So safety and quality issues have not been reported. For example, if you run a patient support program, for example, if you have adverse events which have been reported through that, it is still important for us to report it to the pharmacovigilance team, who then reports it to the health authorities as well, right? So this is really important, and this is something that a lot of companies have been pulled up for. Now, even in terms of scientific interaction, the underlying rationale for any activity, any event, any sort of maybe a meeting or a CME that you're doing should really be something that contributes to the care and well-being of the patient, right? And that's why it's important that everything that you do has clear objectives, have clear agenda. You know who you're inviting for the meeting. You choose your speakers appropriately, and those things are really important. Yeah. And that kind of leads you into the bribery and corruption bit, because that's also another very important risk that a lot of organizations have been pulled up for. And every activity that we have, if you're sponsoring a doctor, or if you're sort of uh, involving him as a speaker, or involving him as an advisory board member, it is still important to have a proper intent for engaging that doctor. Sometimes organizations have also been pulled up for engaging the same doctor multiple times, right? Which also shows that maybe you're choosing the doctor for his prescription, or because of his certain paying him excessively, versus really choosing speakers. But this may not always be the case. You may have a really good speaker you are engaging, but you need to be wary about how many times you engage a speaker as well. And a lot of countries have caps on this. Now, the last one is about inappropriate payments to third parties. So it's not only about doctors, but it's also, for example, an organization or an institution which requests for, say, a research grant or an investigator-sponsored study or research that you've received requests for. It is important to have proper documentation of the request, and the fact that the request has been received, reviewed, and approved. This entire process has to be properly documented so that you're not paying an organization unnecessarily as well. Yeah. Okay, so case studies, these are my favorite ones, but there are a lot of case studies, but I've just given a couple of examples. So there was a company that had missing adverse events. So for example, the European EMA, the European Union, basically sort of did an investigation on a particular company for failing to properly report 80,000 adverse events. Yeah. And this is huge because this part of those 80,000 also involved 15,000 deaths, which were possibly associated with some of their drugs, right? And this analysis was collected through a patient support program, and it never really got reported to the health authorities. Now, what is the takeaway from this? It's really about, even if you have an indirect source of safety data, right? So it's not only about a doctor reporting a safety event to you, even if you have indirect safety data reports, it could be through a program, it could be through even events that you do. So for example, if you have an advisory board, and there is discussions about adverse events, if there's a real adverse event being talked about there, it still needs to be reported, right? The second one is about, it was a $3 billion wake-up call, which happened to a company where they had to settle criminal and civil charges because there were multiple violations, but the main violation that they saw was failure to report safety data related to an antidepressant and a diabetes drug, right? And the company was accused of withholding the data, and because it showed increased cardiovascular risk with its drugs. Now, why is this? Why did they get charged so much, and why is this so important? Is because transparency is really important. Now, if you have safety data which potentially puts patients at risk, it is very important that it has to be reported and it has to be communicated appropriately, right? Now, the third one is about off-label promotion risk. So there was a $1.5 billion fine that was levied on this particular company for illegally promoting its drug in an off-label manner, right? And what does that really mean? Now, it really means that your label may be approved for a particular indication, but you're promoting it in a different indication altogether. And this case actually highlights how off-label promotion can also have a pharmacovigilance component to it, because off-label use also needs to be reported to health authorities, right? So pharmacovigilance doesn't stop at the label. Just because somebody's using your drug in something that is not part of your label, it still needs to be reported, right? And anything relating to the drug still needs to be reported. And of course, off-label use promotion is definitely a serious no-no, right? If it's not on label, you should not be promoting it. Okay, so as we saw in the 3 case studies, the cost of compliance is very high, right? You can have administrative fines. You saw the high amount of fines that can come. You can have marketing bans. You can have loss of reimbursement, claims for damage, serious loss of reputation, criminal punishment in some cases. But ultimately, it's really about loss of public trust and confidence, which you don't really want for your organization, right? Now, what are the challenges? Because there are certain rules, and I think there were some questions about when something is not covered in a particular regulation or a law, what do you do, right? And that's a case in a lot of places. So navigating complex regulations is one of the key challenges in compliance, because there are a lot of gray areas, right? There are a lot of things when you actually go into the details of each law and each regulation. There are a lot of gray areas which are open to interpretation. And this is something that you need to sit down with the organization and see what is the impact and how you want to handle it within the organization as well. Yeah. So just because it's a gray area, it's not always okay to go ahead and do. It is important for us to be aware of those gray areas and make sure that we're not violating any, sort of patient safety or, anything that harms the patient or impacts the patient, right? The second one is about ensuring accurate and ethical communication. So it could be a little difficult distinguishing promotional and non-promotional communication. Now, this is something that a lot of people struggle with in terms of communication, right? How do you be non-promotional at the same time communicate the value of your product? So that can also be something that lots of companies face challenges in. Managing relationships with doctors. So you can involve doctors in a multitude of facets, right? You can involve them by imparting education and knowledge. You can seek advice from them, and you're also involving them in research activities. So it's really about managing those relationships, making sure you're not overly involving doctors, making sure you're getting the right doctors for the right kind of activity that you're having. So those can also get a little tricky and can be challenging. And the last one is really a lot of activities are not supported by codes, right? And these are things that you really need to define locally in your organization and come up with, regulations or come up with some sort of guidance on how in your company you want to do it or you want to run it. So some of these are patient support programs, disease awareness campaigns, social media activities, and more recently, artificial intelligence as well. Okay, so if you're looking for a career in medical compliance, what can you expect, right? So what is your day-to-day going to really look like? A lot of it is about advice and consults. So a lot of functions could come to you and ask you, I'm planning a certain activity. What regulations should I be wary of? How does this impact my activity, right? So they could be asking you for advice and consultations. You may be involved in a lot of training activities because you need to be training cross-functional teams, newcomers, on not only changing regulations, but also requirements or guidances that you set out within your organizations, either globally or locally, that is defined, right? Another one is about quality checks. So you might also be involved in performing quality checks of certain high-risk areas. So you can't really quality check everything. In case your organization has a lot of activities, it may be impossible to check everything. So you need to define what are the key risk areas in your organization, and what are you putting in place to ensure that's not going to happen again, and there's no risk for that particular activity. And also checking a percentage of activities to make sure that it is appropriate and compliant, right? And this entire activity is something called enterprise risk management. So you would work with the risk management and legal teams to really look overall at your organization, see what kind of risks are there for your organization, and put in things in place to make sure those risks are no longer an issue for you, right? A lot of your job would also be stakeholder management, because you're going to be talking to a lot of functions. You're going to be liaising with legal, very importantly, the rest of your medical team, field teams, your marketing teams, your, maybe if you have global or regional teams, and of course, regulatory teams as well. So you're going to be, really talking to a lot of stakeholders, and also having that balance between not stopping innovation, because we really want to look at innovation and innovative ideas, but really helping your organization do it the right way. And that's really the key difference between a legal function and a medical compliance function, right? In legal, it's usually a yes or no, whereas in a medical compliance function, it's how do I do this appropriately? Yeah, that's the question you would ask yourself. You would also be a key player in audits and inspection. And audit is something that you usually do internally within your organization to make sure that you're inspection ready. And an inspection is something that a health authority conducts on you, right? So we usually perform audits within the company to make sure that if we have an inspection, we are ready for that inspection, because inspections are a lot more rigorous, they're more tedious, and they're taken very seriously. So it is something that we need to always be prepared for as an organization. You would also be involved in developing standards and guidances. So we talked a little about those gray areas that we saw. There may be a lot of times when you need to put down guidances for those gray areas so that we're not at risk. Yeah. And of course, overarching for all of this is clear documentation and reporting, right? So if you've heard the saying, if it's not documented, it's not done, it doesn't apply only to clinical research. It really applies to pretty much everything that you do. So make sure that every activity, everything that you do has clear documentation and is reported appropriately. Yeah. Now, what are the critical, sort of skills that you really need if you want to get into a career in medical compliance, right? So one, definitely a high level of integrity. You need to have some sort of critical thinking as well. You need to be able to have some courage, of course, because you need to be, telling certain people that you can or cannot do it, but you also need to be collaborating with them effectively to tell them how best to do certain activities, right? You also need to keep the patient at the forefront, right? At the end of the day, you should always be thinking about patient safety. How is this going to impact my patients? How is this going to impact, the organization as well? Is it a risk to the patient? Is it a risk to the organization? And these are things that you always need to keep asking every time there's an activity. And of course, you need to have that risk versus benefit mindset in terms of, even though you know the risk, what is okay to go with versus what is not okay to go ahead with, right? So that's very important. And of course, at the end of the day, it always comes down to protecting patients and protecting the company's license to operate as well, because those are both the key things that you're going to be working towards. Okay, so a little about the future of medical compliance, right? So what is it going to look like? So it is something that is here to stay. It is becoming more robust. But why it is so important and becoming even more important is because the government and the industries are coming up with a lot of codes and making a lot of codes mandatory as well, right? The government is taking a lot of things seriously, especially in terms of corruption and bribery, those kind of things, but also in terms of digital innovation, right? One is data integrity and cybersecurity, because that's becoming a huge, gray area as well. It's really about protecting patient information and ensuring data privacy. And it's important that all our systems, all our digital environments are all GXP validated. There's a lot of, things that need to be known and also are unknown. So it's important to keep this in mind when you are, planning a future. So if you have further knowledge in a digital environment or are digital or tech savvy or have some basic knowledge about artificial intelligence and the key risks associated with artificial intelligence, that would definitely help you as well. There is a lot more global regulatory complexity because, of course, every country has its own regulations like the FDA, EMA, but they're also starting to work together now, right? So even Indian organizations are starting to work and look at other organizations, or other organizations are looking towards Indian regulations to make sure that, all of us are following the same principles more or less. The role of real world evidence has also become a lot more important nowadays. Previously, it was something that we do to add data, but now it's also becoming a key instrument to getting drug approvals as well, and additional indication approvals. So it is even more important for our real RWE studies to be so much more robust. There's also a changing clinical trial landscape. So if you see clinical trials nowadays, they've also changed a lot with digitalization. There's something called decentralized clinical trials, which has also come up. So a lot of variations, which of course would impact regulations and compliance. And of course, therapies also are changing, right? It's not only about drugs, which are suitable to everyone. Now, personalized medicine has become so much more, the talk of the day, cell and gene therapy, things like that, which we are not very sure about, but also which the current regulations cannot really, suit the needs of these upcoming therapies and molecules. So that's also something that we need to look at. So at the end of the day, like I said, it's really about balancing innovation and the regulations that we have, and also coming up with new regulations and making sure that we are up to date on these regulations, and make sure that whatever we're doing as an organization is fitting within these regulations, and we're being compliant at the end of the day, but also being innovative, because that is important for us to move forward as organizations. We also need to continue being innovative, right? Okay, and this is my last slide. So at the end of the day, when we talk about medical governance and compliance, it is important as a role to interpret and apply these policies, procedures, and codes to make sure that all our activities are, adhering to whatever standards that are set out. The codes and regulations, like we saw, will continuously evolve, right? Because everything keeps changing. There's so much change in terms of people, process, activities that we're doing. So codes and regulations will constantly change. So there will always be a need. And the most important point I would like to leave you all with is that it's not only the role of medical governance to make sure that we're compliant, right? Everybody, especially in medical affairs, and the wider organization as well, but especially in medical affairs, needs to wear that hat of compliance in anything that you do when you're planning any activity. Because at the end of the day, we need to ensure that our patients are safe and our company's license to operate is safe as well. So yeah, with that, that's the end of my presentation. I hope it was useful to you. I hope it covered everything that you wanted to know about. And of course, we're open to questions now as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vaishnavi. It was wonderful and insightful. I believe everyone has enjoyed it. So, guys, do you have any questions? Please, if you have any questions, please go ahead. Please ask. Yes, Pritamji, please ask your question.
My question would be regarding the regulations always, because it is regulations. So there is a term named lay summary.
Mhm,
There is a term named lay summary.
mhm.
So is there any regulation governing governing the preparation of lay summary?
So you're talking about PLS, like,
No,
patient,
it's a lay summary.
like a
Lay
layperson
summary,
summary, like how you make
yes.
clinical trial
Yeah,
research
so
applicable.
clinical now how you make clinical data to make to be very
Layperson
understandable.
understood, right?
Yeah, so in a simple person, maybe a patient can understand. So that
Yeah.
is basically a lay summary. Is there any regulations aligning to that whole idea of lay summary?
So we do have, so at least within our organization, this lay summaries are called PLS, so it's plain language summaries, right? And in a plain language summary, usually you get it reviewed by multiple people to make sure that it is fitting the requirements of the clinical trial data that you come up with. Sometimes you would even get a patient to sort of check that plain language summary and be a reviewer in the plain language summary to make sure that it makes sense to them, right? But the basic requirements for a plain language summary is just that. It's to make sure that whatever data you have is not being promotional, but at the same time, it's really communicating the data that you've come up with in clinical research. Yeah, and that's the basic key points that you need to keep in mind for PLS. But in India, we don't really have, not that I know of, but we don't have any PLS, you know, uh, requirements or anything
Governing
that
regulations.
governs PLS for sure. Yeah.
And say, for example, I just one more question.
Mhm,
So, if an organization is purchasing a product
mhm,
from the other organization, which is known as asset purchase. or
Mm-hmm.
asset purchasing, which is comes under the law of comes under the agreement known as asset purchase agreement.
Yeah.
Asset purchase agreement. In that scenario, uh, what does what will be a role of a medical affairs team to check in the initial phases? I'm not telling that that agreement is made now you do whatever you feel like. That is not the case. In that type of agreement, initially from the very initial stages, all the relevant stakeholders are involved in the in to the negotiation process.
Yeah.
So in that case, what would be the role of a medical affairs team? And secondly, is there any regulation levied for taking up, is there any regulation levied or regulation governed for taking up any assets or bringing any assets as a product in the organization?
Right. So that's a very good question. The main thing when you take up an asset or you take up a molecule, you're either co-marketing it or you're doing like a co-distribution. So it really depends on the role that the partner organization is doing, right? Are you taking it over completely away from them? Are you
Hmm.
co-marketing it? Are you co-distributing? So it's really depending on that that you define in the contract that you have with them. What we usually do is there has to be a thorough transfer of knowledge. And transfer of knowledge is very important when you're giving over or handing over an asset, right? And when you're transferring knowledge, it should be everything in terms of the medical inquiries that have come for that product, the medical information for that product, the different communication modalities that you have, any digital environments that you've set up for that product, everything that you have, that transfer of knowledge has to be there, right? That is very key. The second is really about contracting appropriately. And in that contract, you really need to mention, how long you're going to give the support to that team. And also how that support is going to look, right? So for example, whether it's, for the first 6 months, you're going to do like a, monthly transfer of knowledge, whether you're going to do a, face-to-face meeting, whether you're going to do like, trainings for all their medical affairs, or whether you're going to do, you transfer to them and then they train their team. So that has to be clearly defined in the contract that you have between the organizations. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's answered. Thank you.
Thanks, Preetham.
Great. I think Dr. Dimpy, yeah,
Dimpy.
please go ahead with your question.
Hello,
Yeah.
good evening, ma'am. Thank you for this session. I have two questions.
Mhm.
So, my first question is regarding IND application and new drug application. So,
Mhm.
during these applications, we are meeting with regulators frequently, right?
Mhm.
During different phases of drug development. So, what is the separate role of medical affairs team and the compliance team in this regulators meeting?
So the medical affairs team, of course, prepares the dossier that you are, is key person who's preparing that dossier in terms of, the clinical trial data, the information about the molecule, those kind of things, right? Which is important for that meeting with the policymaker, right? With the health authorities. Compliance doesn't play too much of a role here. Honestly, like I don't really involve myself in the regulatory, communications that we have. But that being said, it's really important that the medical team itself is, sort of transparent about all the data that they are disclosing to the health authorities, right? That's important. But compliance doesn't play a very big role here. The regulatory affairs team does, because regulatory affairs is that team which really, is involved in health authority communications, uh, health authority making those connections with health authority, and also, sort of being part of the SEC meetings, those kind of things. So it's mostly the regulatory affairs and the medical affairs team who would be mostly involved here. Does that answer your question, Dimple?
Yes, ma'am. And I have a second question regarding this semaglutide. As we all know, there is this recent safety issue with the semaglutide drugs, that
Mhm,
is non-arthritic anterior ischemic optic neuropathy. So
mhm,
we have seen that in their clinical trial data, they have shown that it is a rare side effect,
mhm.
but they have not included that in drug label, which
Yeah,
it was included after EMA said them to do that in
yeah,
June 2025. So
yeah.
will this be considered as an issue, or something?
It is definitely a compliance issue. It is a compliance violation in terms of them not including it in the label. I'm not sure what fines or what was levied on the company for this lapse, but ideally it is a compliance violation if it was not initially included in the label and then later asked to be included in the label. Even if it is something which is still in the investigational stages, whatever data you have has to be disclosed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Any other questions? Anyone? Do anyone have any questions, guys? Okay, if no more questions, we can wind up.
And give everybody their Sunday evening back. But thank you so much for spending your Sunday evening with me. It was very nice. And thank you for all the interesting questions. It was really
Yes, thank you very
informative.
much, Dr. Vaishnavi. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone. Take
Thank
care.
you. Thank you, Dr. Vaishnavi. Thank you, Dr. Ajit.
Thank you, Tariq. Bye-bye. Take care, guys. Thank you.